Hello everyone, welcome back to our Angular series. So today we want to talk about directives and pipes, both of which allow us to incorporate some dynamic behavior and some ways that we can programmably control our DOM. So in Angular, there are two main types of directives. One is called a structural directive, and a structural directive allows us to be able to change our DOM dynamically. Now, we've seen an example of structural directive already when we talked about ng4, which allows us to be able to loop through a bunch of items and put it onto the DOM. In this video, we're going to take a look at ngIf as well, which is kind of a conditional way of putting something onto the DOM. An attribute directive, on the other hand, is something that allows us to change the appearance or the behavior of DOM elements that they're attached to. So there is an attribute directive that we're going to take a look at called ngClass. We can also create our own custom directives and make them behave the way that we want to. Now, pipes are a transformation of data. So if we have some data that is represented, we can put that into a pipe, and this is going to transform the representation from one representation to another. So some examples of pipes are searching or some kind of filter, for example, changing a string from uppercase to lowercase. So what we're going to do in this video is go back to our people app and apply some custom directives and pipes so we can create some better look for our application. So let's dive right in. All right, so we're back in our people app, and currently what we have is a bunch of people that we're displaying onto the browser. So I'm just going to quickly run an ng serve here to serve up this application. And if we go to localhost 4200, you'll see that this is our people app and everything looks good so far. Now we want to add some directives in here and pipes just to give it a little bit more dynamic behavior. Now, as I said, directives are things that add logic and programmability to the components that are in our page. So the first thing we'll talk about is structural directives. Now, we've already seen examples of structural directives when we look at people list, when we were looking at the HTML. This ng4 is an example of a structural directive because it adds things to the DOM or it manipulates the DOM depending on a specific variable, in this case, people. So there are other parts of the DOM that I can manipulate. So I'm going to jump over to the person.html here. And let's say that I want this instructor, instead of printing true or false, I want them to print something based on a condition. So over here, instead of printing instructor, person.instructor, which currently is just a Boolean, right? So right now we have true, true. We have a bunch of trues. Maybe I should come back and change that a little bit. So we'll come over here and let's say I make some of these people false, right? Just so that we can contrast what it looks like. So what I want is I want to add a little bit more logic in here to create a look instead of printing out true or false, which is a direct value of the variable. I want to print out based on a condition. So this is where ng template comes in. So I'm going to jump over to our our person component here, and in here, I'm going to add an ng template. And what this ng template allows me to do is specify a variable that goes with this template. So I'm just going to call this ins for instructor, and I'm going to make another template for non-instructors. So we'll say not instructor. All right, so in this template, I'm going to have some HTML to display in this situation, and here I'm going to have other HTML to display in another situation. So let's just say I want to keep things simple. I just want to add a check mark. Okay, so we'll do check. This is the HTML entity for adding a check mark, and then here we're going to do a HTML entity for the X. So here we'll use the Unicode for this, which I believe is 1005. We'll take a look at what that looks like, and in here, instead of printing person.instructor, I do want person.instructor to be evaluated. So I'm going to put a span in here. And remember, we talked about some attributes for the ng4. So this is an attribute that I can add for ngIf. So I'm going to do ngIf. And then what we pass in as a string is something that can be evaluated to be true or false. So in this case, I'm going to evaluate person.instructor. Now, this could just as easily be another function that you call that's found in the person component.ts, right? So in here, it could be a function that you call that returns a true or false. So this is just anything that can give me a true or false value. All right, so the second thing we'll add here is if ngIf is equal to this instructor, if it's true, then this is a keyword, then I'm going to print out the template ins. Else, I'm going to print out the not in instructor. Okay, so this is a Whoops, I should be adding it in here. This is a template that I'm going to be adding. All right, so we have an ng if statement. We have a person.instructor. So this evaluate to true or false. If it's true, then I'm going to print out the template associated with INS. Otherwise, I'm going to print out the one associated with not INS. You can play around with this. You can probably guess that I can have a lot more HTML embedded inside of the content that are in each of the templates. So I'm just going to get rid of this. And instead, I'm going to rely on this span tag in order to print out what it needs to print out. So if we come over here, and I'm going to go to my console, and you can see that we have instead a check mark or an X depending on whether they're an instructor or not. All right, so this, I'm going to come over here just in my CSS, and let's do a little bit more width than this. Let's do about 70 viewport width so that we have a little bit more room to play with. So I hope you can see that that is what is being printed out. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is a directive, which is a attribute directive. So an attribute directive is used to change the appearance or the behavior of the DOM, and rather than adding or removing things from the DOM. So one example of an attribute directive is an ng class, and we'll show you what that looks like in 1 second. So let's say I come over to this person component.css, and I want to add another selector here. And I want to add a class called instructor style. All right, so that means any class that has this instructor style, I want it to display like this. So instead of the border being 1 pixel in solid black, I want to have it as 1 pixel solid red. And so all the instructors I want to be red as a border. And just so that it stands out a little bit more, I'm going to do a box shadow that is 10 pixels, and then 5 pixels, and then 10 pixels as the spread. And I want it to be gray. All right, so this is going to be my instructor style. And in a second, I want to attach this class to any person that I'm printing out that is an instructor. So we'll come back to this person component.html, and under this p tag, I want to apply this style to it. So we're going to use an attribute called ng class. Okay, so this is binding to this property called ng class, and the ng class is going to take in a object, which is going to be called instructor style. So this instructor style is the CSS that I defined a little bit earlier, and this is going to correspond to person.instructor. So again, this is a true or false statement. This could be a attribute as we have here, or it could just be as a result of a function call. Okay, so we have an ng class is equal to instructor style. I believe I call instructor style. If the person.instructor is true, is evaluated to be true. All right, so if we take a look at the result here, you'll notice that everybody that's an instructor is going to have this new style applied to it. Right. So this is just adding on to a class whenever something is evaluated to be true. And as I said, this thing over here is just a function that we call, or it's a property that we have access to in our TS file. All right, the third type of directive that I want to talk about is a type that we can create by ourselves. So this is going to be a custom directive that we're going to create. So I'm going to come over here to the terminal, and I'm going to do an ng generate directive. All right, so this is a key term directive. So we're going to generate a directive, and we're going to take a look at the files that it creates in 1 second. I'm going to do skip tests equals true because I don't want my spec file. And here I'm going to create a colors directive. Now this is just something that I'm going to program in. It's actually doing something really stupid, which is just to iterate through a bunch of colors. But I hope you can take this example and be a little bit more creative and think about other attributes that I can add to my page. So here you'll notice that it updates our app.module.ts file, and it also creates for me a colors.directive.ts. Okay, so we'll take a look at both of those files. We'll start with the app.modules file. You'll see that it adds as a declaration a colors directive, which again is something that I'm going to need in order to render out my page. We'll need this colors directive, which comes from, our definition comes from this file called colors.directive. If we jump over to colors.directive, you'll see that it's just like a class, right? So just like any other class that we've created, except we've created a selector. Okay, so this selector is called app colors, and we have to remember this because this is the attribute that we're going to use to invoke this directive. So in the colors directive, we're going to, let's first create some variables. So I'm going to have some colors, and some colors I'm going to define, and these are colors that are CSS colors. Okay, so I'm going to have an Alice blue, I'm going to have a light green, an aqua, light blue, light gray, and white. All right, so these are some colors that I want to define. And in a second, what I want is to be able to apply these colors to the background of anything that I click. Okay, so any person that I click, I want to apply these colors in turn. So I'm going to create a index called I, which initially is equal to 0. And I'm going to have a few annotations here, some decorators, for me to cycle through. All right, so one of the first annotators that I want to talk about here is called host binding. Okay, so host binding is that whatever this directive is applied to. Now, in a second, we're actually going to apply this directive to this p tag. So that means I'm going to apply it to every single person. Okay, so whoever I'm applying this directive to, I'm going to bind the host property style dot background color. Okay, so whatever the host style dot background color is, I'm going to attach it as a variable called bg color. Okay, so this is used internally, which is a string, and I'm going to initially make it white. Okay, because after all, the initial color is white, right? The initial background color is white. So I'm going to initially give it a white value, and that's the first host binding. Okay, so whenever now in this TS file, when I refer to the bg color attribute, I'm talking about the style of the background of the host. Okay, so this is what this line is talking about. So whatever host we're binding to, the style is this attribute in the TS file. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add this called host, not host binding, but host listener. And this host listener, it should be pretty clear what this is doing is whatever I'm binding to the host, I want to listen for an event. So I want to listen for a click event. So anytime I click on a person, right, anywhere within this person, I want this event to fire, and I want it to invoke this change color method, which I'm about to call right now, or which I'm about to define right now. So change color is going to take this dot bg color. So you remember the bg color is associated with the background color, and I'm going to make it this dot colors. So colors is this, I should probably call it colors. So this dot colors and this dot I. So whatever the I is. Okay, so whatever the I is, I'm going to assign it to the colors. Sorry, not dot, but indexed at this dot I. All right, and then I'm going to update this dot I by doing equals to, and then I'm going to do a plus plus this dot I, and then I'm going to mod it with this dot colors dot length. All right, so essentially what this is doing is I'm going to increment it, and then I'm going to mod it with the colors dot length. Okay, so I'm just going to cycle through all of these values from 0 all the way up to, in this case, 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so next we are going to well, let's apply this. I think we have everything here. So this directive looks fine. And so I'm going to apply it to the person component.html. So as I said, this is just going to be an attribute that we can apply, right? So this is going to be app colors. So we're just going to say this is app colors, and this is the binding to that directive, right? So this, we can create as many custom directives as we want, and we can apply it directly to these hosts. Okay, so now all the hosts should be binded with these app colors. And when I click on these people, you'll see it kind of cycles through all of those colors. Okay, this, again, not doing anything spectacular, actually doing something pretty stupid, but you can probably get the idea and expand on this and see how you can put other things that are a little bit more interesting onto the page. All right, so that is an example of a custom directive. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about pipes. So pipes, as I said before, is a transformation of data. So right now we have a representation that looks like this. We have a people app, and then our representation of the people goes through this for loop and outputs these person components one at a time. But what if I want some other data to be passed in and to be calculated alongside of these data that I'm showing? So in particular, I want to show you two things. Right now we put the added on, right, as just a number. So maybe I actually want to display the date instead of this number. So that might invoke a transformation. Now, one thing we can do is we can actually write a function to calculate. So based on this number, to spit out the month, the year, and the day. And that's perfectly fine, because right now you can see that this is what we have. So I can actually have 3 interpolations for the year, the month, and the day. But luckily in Angular, we actually have a pipe that does that. So if we go into our person component, so here is our added on. So currently what's being displayed as person.addedOn is actually a number, and there is a pipe called date. So to invoke a pipe, we use the straight line, and we just call whatever the pipe is. All right, so by default, there is a date pipe, which is built into Angular, which is going to display something for me. All right, so if we take a look at this, we haven't saved it, but if we take a look at this, it'll display the actual date. Right, so that's what the date pipe does. Right, so by default, it's going to have 3 values for the month, one value for the day, and then the comma, and then a year. So these pipes can actually be used back to back. So there is an uppercase pipe that I can that will turn a string into its uppercase. So this is another pipe that is stored in Angular, and so this is the uppercase version of that of the date. And you can similarly go to lowercase, and if you take a look at lowercase, now it's a lowercase. Right. So you can play around with these pipes, and one thing that we can also do with these pipes is pass in some extra parameters. So date, if we take a look at the definition of the date pipe in Angular, it actually says that we can pass in a parameter that specifies the format of the date. So by default, it's formatted as three months, right? 3 month, and then 1 day, and then a comma, and then 3 years, right? So let's say I actually want two spots for the day, and I don't want this comma. Rather, I want a straight line. Okay, so if we do something like this, then it will print it out in that format. Okay, so similarly, I can take the years, I can put it at the front, I can make it 2, and then I can make a comma here, and you get the idea, right? So I can actually do something like this, right? So 2023, and then November 6th. All right. So again, you can play around with that and see what look that you want. I'm actually quite happy with the default, the default that is displaying here. So I will just turn it back to this, and that would be our first usage of a pipe. Now you might be wondering, well, it's not that great because it's really just running a function, right? In the background, it's really running a function. So yes, it is, but we're gonna actually see a couple more usages of pipes down the road that transforms one representation of data to another. So later on, we're actually going to write a find or a search function that allows us to search for our people, and we want to filter the people as we do searching. Right, so that's going to be a little bit more of a application, a nice application of pipes, rather than just changing the representation of a day and then changing it to a string and so on. But I do want to do one last example here, which is just giving an example of how we do a custom pipe. So how we do a custom pipe, we can come down here, and again, we're going to do an ng generate, but this time we're going to generate a pipe. Okay, so we'll do pipe, and then once again, I will skip tests equals true, and we can call this pipe whatever we want. Okay, so let's again do a simple example where I want to have a pipe called count people. Okay, so this is going to be a pipe where I just want to display the number of people that I currently have in my application. So I'm going to create this, and you can see that it's created, it's updated app.module. We'll take a look at that in 1 second. And also we have count people pipe. Okay, so count people pipe is right here. So again, let's first take a look at app module. So app module is going to import from this count people pipe, and it's also going to declare it because after all of these components, we need it for the functionality of our page. So if we jump over to count people pipe, and let's see what it gives us. So first we have this pipe annotation, or this pipe decorator, and this is the name that we're going to give it. So if we want to invoke this pipe, we are going to need count people. Okay. Now count people is going to assume that the data is of some type already. Okay, so it gives us kind of a function stub here, and we're overriding this thing called transform. So if you remember implements is from an interface. So pipe transform is actually an interface that I'm going to create this class out of. All right, so the transform is I'm going to take a list of people. Okay, so I'm going to have a variable called people, which is a list of people or an array of people. Now, again, this is bad form, but you can imagine that we probably should have a class defined called people, and there's probably going to be a class like with a name and age and stuff like that, whatever we have in our people. Right, so that's probably that's the proper way of doing things. This transform function is going to give me back a number. So we're doing a transformation of this data over to this data, right? So we have to specify that that's the transformation that's taking place. All right, so how does that transformation take place? Well, given a list of people or an array of people, how do I, what number am I giving back? Well, since this is count people, I'm just going to give it the people.length. Okay, now again, very stupid way of doing a transform, and we're going to add something more elaborate to this in a later example. But for now, I hope you get the idea, right? So it's just taking some data, and then we're going to define a transformation function into another form of data, right? So this is our data type that we're passing back. Right, so as a final implementation here, maybe I should take the people list, and I'm going to print out. So let's go to the people list, and at the top of this people list, so before I go through this app person and going through this for loop, I actually want to create a paragraph. And in this paragraph, I'm just going to say number of people. Okay, this is going to indicate the number of people. Now, if I take the people, so this people is the array that I have, and I pipe it in to count people. So notice the order of evaluation that's happening here. So I have the array called people. I'm going to send that into a pipe called count people, and count people is going to take that and it's going to just return people.length, right, as a number. Okay, so again, this is not doing very much, but I hope you can see how pipes are used in practice. All right, so if we come back with this, we have that the number of people is equal to 5. And if we decide to delete some of these people, you'll see that, again, this people pipe count people is invoked right away. And you can see that as I delete these people, the number of people is going to decrease. All right, so this is just a very preliminary example of how we use pipes and how we use directives. So what I want to do next in the next video is come back and talk about how we can take input from the user. Because right now, although we have interaction with our application, there's just no way for the user to type something in for the dynamic behavior to happen, right? So what if I need some inputs from the user in order for me to process something? Like, for example, if I wanted to do a search on this, right? So if I wanted to do a search for the name Bobby, right? How would I be able to take that input in right now? What component is responsible for that? And for that matter, how do I account for that data given all of these inputs and outputs? So I want to talk about that in the next lesson. So for now, this is all I have. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.